me just say thank you so much for doing this, and thanks for doing it so early. And truly, I can't wait to learn more about your company. I know we've talked several times, but just to actually know exactly what you do and to be able to share that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much. And I think everybody knows me, but I always want to say I'm Lisa with Recruiting for Growth, in case you don't. But, and Micki, you want to introduce yourself a little bit before I start inundating you with questions?
Sure. So my name is Micki Vandeloo. I'm the president of Lakeview Consulting. We are a team of 5 grant professionals who help companies in the manufacturing community find and access grants and incentives and other resources to both fund their success and promote their success. So just as a little bit of background, I spent 25 years in manufacturing. I got a degree in industrial engineering, which I've now figured out is the weirdest way to get to grant writing, because every other grant writer, it seems like, that I talk to is either in journalism or has some kind of English background, and some of them came from like nonprofit or science, something like that, but not out of manufacturing. So in 25 years, I just discovered that most leaders did not know about what kind of resources as far as funding were available to them. 2, they didn't have the time or resources to go after that funding. So when I realized that, I just had an idea, let's start a company that does this for manufacturers and for the manufacturing community. And I started doing it as a side hustle for a number of years. Probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I started doing it at night and on weekends. And I thought this is going to be fine for a while. And it just grew. I had a really nice network of people that serve manufacturers and they wanted my services. And so I started working with them, and then I started working with their manufacturers. And then I started working a lot of nights and weekends, and suffered the detrimental effects of working all that. And in 2017, I actually had a job that allowed me to spend a couple of days a week working on my business. The owner, when he hired me, knew that I had the business. And I did that job for about 3 years, ended up in management on a part-time basis, which I'll talk to anybody about that. Not ever a great idea. But I ended up in management on a part-time basis. And 3 years ago, 2017, almost 4, I left and started full-time and never looked back. So this has been an incredible year, not only because of COVID and the pandemic, but the funding landscape. If you guys follow any of the CARES Act funding, is absolutely crazy right now, and has been since March. And so we've not lacked for work at all. So yeah, that's my introduction.
Well, and thank you. So, until you and I talked the first time, I had no idea that grants were available to anybody other than a university or a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
How did you figure that out? And how do you make that known to your clients?
Right. So what I do, I tell people what I do is about 90% education, right? So I educate a lot of manufacturers. I do it through webinars like this, that I just get out to them. But how I got here was I actually worked for, I did training grants in one of the jobs that I did. I wrote training grants for companies. And, if you ever talk to a manufacturer or for-profit company, they will tell you that if they have any exposure to grants, it's because they worked with a community college that gave them grant funding for training, or they did access some training funding. So, that was kind of a low hanging fruit type thing with companies. The company that I worked for, Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center, did grants to help offset the cost of their services, which were training grants. So I kind of knew about grants. I went to work then for one of my clients at IMEC, and it's a steel service center company. And I was with them in 2008, 2009. And the atmosphere in 2008, 2009 was very similar to this year. So as you remember, there was a recession, the economy was tanking, stock market was crashing, the world was going to end, all that kind of stuff. And so in steel, we were being impacted pretty significantly. So just like this year with CARES funding, in 2008, 2009, the government had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, just a different name, big pot of money, basically. And so the federal government had the ERA funding, and they did the same thing that the CARES Act funding is doing. The government distributed a portion of that money to states. Now, a lot of people know the ERA funding is what bailed out Chrysler, GM, Ford, but another portion of that money gave money to the states, and the states were allowed to do with that money whatever they wanted, but it had to spur the economy in that state. Well, what had happened in Illinois was there was a big push at that time for wind energy. A lot of Illinois is very prime for wind energy. So if you go north, where there's very flat ground, lots of wind, you'll know when you're there. You'll actually get blown out of your car. And if you look now, there's tons of wind turbines. Well, a lot of those were funded in 2008, 2009. But the state came up with a grant program called the Wind Energy Business Development Program, something like that. And they were looking for suppliers that could supply to the wind energy industry. And they were wanting to put money into helping those companies expand their capability. So I found out, I went to a workshop basically, and they said, well, there's this grant opportunity and you can get up to about $600,000 for equipment to serve the wind energy industry. So I was pretty interested because steel goes into almost anything, right? So I went back to my company and I said, hey, there's this opportunity. Are we looking at any kind of equipment to expand our capability? Because to me, I knew we had to be able to do a slightly different type of steel than we were doing processing. And you know, my company management said, yeah, sure, we can, I think we can probably, we're looking at doing this particular project anyway, we'll apply for it. So over a weekend, because they didn't give me much time, this was on a Thursday and the grant application was due on Monday. So I remember sitting down, and you know, training grants are pretty simple. I remember sitting down and just looking through this grant application and literally handwriting 20 pages application, handwriting it. And I was just going to town, and this was on a Saturday, and my husband walks in, he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing a grant application. He goes, oh, and he walked out. And so I wrote the grant application that got the money. Well, over 2 years, it was an interesting procession, because over 2 years I would get calls from the program manager. I was actually managing the program too. So I was managing the implementation of the grant funding. So we were buying equipment and purchasing capital and adding people. And I was managing that whole process and reporting back to the grant funder. And she called me one day and she said, hey, we had a company that went under that was getting funding. And so there's another $500,000 out there. So I said, and she said, do you want it? So I walked down to the president's office and I said, they've got another 500,000. Do you want to invest in anything else? And of course they did. So, you know, and in steel processing, equipment is very expensive, by the way, as in most places. So we did that a number of times. And they ended up getting $2.3 million of funding for $303 million of capital investment. So I started to realize through that process that we would have never known about that funding had I not gone to that workshop. There were very few manufacturers, by the way, at that workshop. I started to realize also that if I hadn't been there to write the grant and to manage the grant, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And so I started to think that, you know, possibly there was a business somewhere here. So that's how I got into it. And it's been this really interesting ride of webinars and podcasts and presentations, partners that help me educate their clients, that bring me together with their clients, my personal outreach through LinkedIn and everything. So just trying to raise awareness is 90% of my job. Yeah.
You focus on manufacturing.
Mhm.
Are grants available to like individuals like me, or and how do I know if they are?
Mhm.
Or why did you focus on manufacturing? Well, I mean, I know your background is
Mhm.
manufacturing, but why only manufacturing, I guess?
Well, and I don't really do only manufacturing. I do the manufacturing, what I call the manufacturing community. So it's the supply chain. So anybody that like manufacturing extension partnership centers, Missouri Enterprise is one of them. And what they do is they support manufacturing. They help them become more productive and more efficient. I work with educators. I work with CTE programs. I'm helping one particular community college association. Our team is working with them on a DOL grant, a Department of Labor grant, that for H-1B visa type training. So programs. So really, we don't just work with manufacturing. Our focus is manufacturing, but we also work with kind of that external community of manufacturers. But to your point, can any business get grant funding? No. So the ones that I've found that typically cannot get grant funding are startups, so brand new businesses. And that is because grant funding, the funding process and funders are very much like loan officers at banks, right? So when they're looking at giving you funding, they're looking at your financial stability. They're looking at your history of being able to pay and manage your company. And if you're a startup business, you simply don't have that history, and so they're not going to consider it a quote unquote good investment. The exception to that is if you are a very high technology startup, and it can even be an individual that does research for like a university or for a company. There is a section of government funding that's called the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Funding, SBIR, STTR. That can go to individuals, but it is very high technology, and it's also extremely competitive. So that's kind of that out there that, yes, that person can get it. The other exception with businesses right now is a lot of businesses are getting COVID funding. And that does not require you necessarily to have a strong financial background. You simply have to say, we've lost this much money due to COVID. Both established companies and newer companies can apply for COVID funding. I do actually put out weekly on LinkedIn, I put out a COVID-19 business and manufacturing summary. So I summarize all the grants that are available nationwide. It's in a Google sheet, so you can sort it by your state. Because it changes every week. Literally, there's new opportunities every week. There's opportunities that drop off because the deadline's passed or the funding's been spent. If they have another round of CARES Act funding, I expect this all to just continue for the next year or so. Because when states get money, they can do one of two things. They can either spend it out for their own use. That is not politically desirable. Usually people want to see that money's flowing to the people that vote for them, right? So what's happening inevitably is as states are getting more CARES Act funding, they're creating new programs for their businesses, as they should. I mean, I don't know that money should necessarily go into state coffers. But basically, so the answer to your question is a little bit complicated, because right now with COVID, yes, a person that is a single business that can prove they're a business and can prove they've lost money, yes, they can get funding. In normal situations, not so much. So the other way a single person business or a business can get funding is by partnering. So a lot of businesses support maybe manufacturers or educators. I'm thinking like software companies, for example, companies that produce software. If maybe they have a software that's going to solve a need that they work with educators, they might participate in a grant project. And by that, I mean, the educator would go and apply for the funding, and that software provider would receive a set of that budget, a portion of that budget to provide their software. So there are ways that businesses can access funding, but it requires partnerships, and it requires, being in the right place at the right time, basically. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier state and federal as far as grants. Do you find that one is easier or better or more receptive? And if it's a state, do you find that one state is easier or more receptive or more giving than another?
Well, I can tell you that most of the manufacturing funding comes through the state. Most states have several programs. Again, most manufacturers don't know about them, but they have several programs. They might have training grants, they might have, and usually they're economic development type grants. So you either have to add jobs or, and invest in capital, invest in training. There are recycling grants that go through the state. Missouri has a really good one for machinery that produces recycled material. So there's a lot of different types of grants through the state. Those are typically easier to access. They're less competitive. It's also an easier application. Federal grants are much more complicated. So just to give you an idea of the magnitude, it might take us 10 hours to write a state grant, and that would be a pretty complex state grant. It will take on the order of 40 to 80 hours to write a federal grant. So it's a
Wow.
much more complicated grant. State grants tend to be forms that you fill out. You might have to provide some narrative. You might have to provide some information that, goes in that form. But federal, you have an RFP that says, here's what you have to put in your application. And by the way, you have 20 pages to do it. Or by the way, you have 40 pages to do it, so they tend to be much more, it tends to be much more develop your project, propose your project, explain your project, than the states are. So state is by far easier, but federal provides a lot more money. So the return for a federal grant can be much greater. Now, I'm putting everything in the perspective of COVID right now. So the thing that's changed, the other thing that's changed with COVID is some states are providing very large grants for manufacturers to expand their capabilities, either to provide PPE or to bring business back from other countries. So I just worked with a manufacturer out in Kansas, and Kansas had several programs that they put their CARES Act money into. And this particular manufacturer got almost $4 million for 2 new lines from the state. And, that is somewhat unusual, but not totally unusual in this era of COVID. So some states have been more inclined to really invest in their manufacturing base, which I think is very commendable. Some states don't have as many programs. Illinois is particularly weak in the grant area, because I can look at several different states and I can see what they offer. Illinois is not the strongest. Missouri is kind of in the middle, I would say, as far as what they offer. So it varies state by state. One that I saw the other day that has a lot of opportunities is, I think Nebraska is.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of it depends on the priorities of their economic development. So, and again, that goes back to the priorities of the administration that's in the state. So if the administration in the state wants to develop business in that state, they will create programs. And apparently Nebraska is really wanting to do that right now.
So this one is a two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you stay caught up with who's offering what?
Mm-hmm.
And since you said political,
Mm-hmm.
will the election change things with regard to what's available for manufacturers?
Okay, so the first part of your question, we get a lot of alerts from federal sources. So I sign up for a lot of, and anybody can do this, by the way. If you're interested in National Science Foundation funding, you can go to NSF and you can sign up for email alerts. So you can get an alert every time that a grant comes out. I use Google Alerts a lot. So I have several Google Alerts that keep me alerted as to what's coming out in the states with regards to COVID in particular. There's grants.gov, which also allows you to do customized alerts on federal funding. Unfortunately, the states don't offer that. The states don't tend to offer alerts for grants. So it's a little more difficult from the states. So for several clients, we do regular research on different types of grants. So we tend to be a little bit more in the know. But anybody can go out and register for grants.gov alerts, NSF, USDA. You can register if you're in a rural area. The election. So what I think is going to happen, no matter who gets in office, and by the way, my team and I were talking about this when we met last week, nothing is going to happen differently for the next year to year and a half. What's out there now is out there. What's been budgeted is out there. There may be new programs that come in, but significant changes, probably not so much. But I can tell you from the federal standpoint that there's a big shift happening right now toward workforce development, toward bringing jobs back from overseas, encouraging companies to invest in new technologies, and that may actually play into the amount of reshoring funding that's out there, because one party would like to see reshoring, bringing business back. The other one would like to see make manufacturing invest in bigger technologies, more innovative technologies, to become a technology leader rather than a follower. And that to me that is what's going to change depending on who comes into office, is the approach to manufacturing grants. Trump is very, and I'm not political. I'm just going to say that right now. I'm just stating facts. Trump is very business oriented. Biden is not so much. So I think the support for businesses could change depending on who gets elected. I think the programs can change, but we do tend to see as many, if not more, grant opportunities under Democratic administrations as we do under Republican. With any business leader in the White House, you're going to see more of a tendency toward business, I believe. And I think that's been proven out this last 4 years. So I think you're going to see more federal opportunities from Department of Labor, from Economic Development Administration, from Department of Education. One thing that COVID has brought out is the need for new and innovative ways to teach. So you're going to continue to see those opportunities. The thing is, if we bring all this business back to the United States, we need workers to produce it, right? So, that's where the workforce development comes in.
And do they have grants for educating employees or attracting employees?
There are grants for educating employees, not necessarily for tracking.
Or attracting.
Oh, I'm sorry, attracting. Yes, absolutely. So they're coming at it from a number of different ways. So the state goes on this. What the state does is they have always done training grants. So they always they will provide funding for the training portion of it. They may also, so the state of Illinois and a number of other states have apprenticeship programs. So that would be kind of in the area of attracting employees. So they might have tax credits. So if a person hires an apprentice and they employ them all year, they might give them a tax credit for the amount of that employee's wages. The on-the-job training through the WIOA centers funds a portion of the employee's wages for up to 6 months if they're being trained on the job. So there are training programs through the states. A lot of federal programs are taking it from the programmatic standpoint. So they are funding community colleges that are creating career pathways and attracting workers. And that requires partnerships between community colleges, economic development, trade associations, companies. So all that. And that's the Department of Labor type funding. Yeah.
Terrific. We are coming up, we have like 6 minutes left, and I haven't asked anybody if anyone, and one already had to leave because of another call.
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions that you want to unmute and ask Micki, since I've been hogging the conversation?
Please do.
Good morning. My name is Amy Gaskin, and we're in the technology field.
Yes.
And I am trying to bring some sensor technology and have it created here in the United States instead of getting it from overseas.
Right.
We're working with the University of Florida a little bit, and I was wondering if there's grants available for technology that is specifically for the senior living industry, because that's what our technology does.
For senior living, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would look at NSF, National Science Foundation. They fund a number of technology projects. You might want to look at the SBIR website to see what might be out there. It's sbir.gov.
Mhm.
The other place that I would look, since you're in the senior area, would be Health and Human Services. And specifically, well, I would just look at Health and Human Services funding. There might be, I worked with another company that did a sensor technology for infants. And it seems like we found a number of opportunities through Health and Human Services. So that would be the 3 places I would recommend. There's a lot that what you're doing is very, it's a very attractive funding area, just because there's been a huge need for more sensor technology, because more people are at home and are unable, especially seniors, are unable to go anywhere. So there's been a need to help monitor those people at home.
Right, that's what we do.
Absolutely.
And I was wondering if a senior living community wanted to put the real-time location technology in their community, would they be able to get a grant to help do that? Because it does COVID, contact tracing, and it also does infectious disease protocols.
Okay. Wow, you have a great technology. And by the way, I meet the coolest people in my job. I'm just saying. I do. So yes, especially if that senior living center or even a hospital. Do you work with hospitals at all?
Yes, we can. We can do hospitals and rehabs as well as nursing homes.
Yeah,
and
you have some really great partners. If they're in a rural area, I would look at the distance learning telemedicine grants through USDA. They are coming out, their round for this year is done, but the round for next year, they love collaborative projects. USDA does. And when you have a broad regional, so I would work on partnerships in the rural area, maybe in a regional area where you can serve several nursing homes, or work with the hospital to get referrals to people that need your technology, because, some of them are going to be home-based. My parents are at home, and they actually have a thing through United Healthcare that they have to input their weight and everything every day, which is, in my opinion, very intrusive, but that's just a whole nother discussion. But they, I think that would be really attractive to USDA from the distance learning and telemedicine side.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. If you need any help, let me know.
Will do.
Since we only have like 2 minutes, you want to let everybody know how to reach you?
Absolutely. Well, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I put out grant opportunities. I check LinkedIn every day. You can just look up I have a company page, Lakeview Consulting, and I have a personal page, Micki Vandeloo. So find me on LinkedIn. You can email me at Micki, MICKI, at Lakeview Consulting, all one word, .net. Or you can check out our website, lakeviewconsulting.net.
Super. Well, I could probably keep you all day with your but I truly, truly appreciate your doing this. And this is recorded. So everybody will learn where the link is. And if you want to share it with any of your clients or anything, you're welcome to do that. I know that there were a couple of people who had to hop off, but both said, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I always love the opportunity to talk about it. So thank you, Lisa, for giving me the opportunity.
Absolutely. And maybe you'll come back.
I hope so.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.